You missed the joke. If you were here, I'm not going to say it again.
It's
All right.
funny when I'm on the phone with
That
somebody.
didn't
It's
come
like,
out. Why?
hilarious.
Did that come out?
No, it didn't. No, they'll never know. All right, welcome to our Wednesday night meeting. And we are in John chapter 19, verse 1. This is the book of John through Jewish eyes. And what I intend to do after the book of John, I want to, this whole Arab Israeli conflict is not that difficult to resolve. Um, the questions surrounding who was in the land, right, in the 1700s, the 1800s, and so forth. So who was actually in the land? That's the crucial question. And where did the refugees come from? Okay. So those are the questions I think we can answer. I'd like to go into that study because there's some good statistics that we can show clearly who was in the land, who was not
So
in
you're
the
talking about
land.
the history of the conflict?
The more I'll go through some of the first through 19th century material, and but I want to explain how the refugee problem occurred
That's
and
important.
where the Arabs that became the refugees, where did they come from?
I think that's
Were they
important.
there from time immemorial, as they say they were, or was that a recent development? If it was a recent development, why? And what were the true numbers, and then what actually happened? So I want to explore that. I don't plan to go up through all of the accords. I don't think that's going to be helpful. But I might glance on them. But we have to definitively account for where did the Arab refugees come from, and why were they there? How many were there? How recently were they there? And is it true that they were always there? Or is it true that they were hardly ever there? So if we can answer those questions, it's going to give us a tremendous amount of understanding as to the modern problem. And then, yeah.
I saw online this guy, it was during a news broadcast, and he held up a deed to his land that was from the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
So that's pretty far back.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying everybody, but he had that document.
Okay. And there are those people, absolutely, no question about it, on both sides,
Yeah.
So the thing is, if we can go through that and come up with some kind of hopefully definitive. Some people say you'll never sort it out, but I think there is a way to sort it out. And then after that, I'd like to go to the book of Habakkuk and study that book in its entirety. One, it's not as long as John. And second of all, it fills in some gaps. It's not a book that's studied that much, but it is a very important book. And I think we'll have some fun going into it. So alternating back and forth between Old Testament books, New Covenant books, and some specialty topics, I think will be very helpful to us and very interesting as well. So Lord, bless your word into our hearts, oh God, in a way that will understand the text and understand what it means, and understand what applications we can derive from it. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right. So John chapter 19, verse 1. Now we can start. Okay.
How's it going?
I'm not saying we were waiting for you. I just explained what we're going to be studying next.
Okay.
And I'll say it at the end when we're done with this. Okay, so we've gone through, in part, the interrogation of Yeshua by Ananias and Caiaphas, and in part Pilate. And we can tell Pilate's disposition in chapter 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Yeshua and had him flogged. Okay, so his truth, what is truth? For Pilate, the truth is what's the easiest thing, what's the most convenient thing for me. All right. Now, one of the things that I would like to bring out is it has some bearing on some discussion regarding Pilate. And that is, what did first century Romans believe about the gods and goddesses. And by and large, it's been pretty much proven that the educated and the sophisticated people of the Roman Empire didn't really believe they were there. But what we can't wrap our heads around is that God worship was as much cultural as it was religious. And whereas we, in Judaism and Christianity, we look at the sacred texts, we interpret them, and then that becomes our basis for doctrine and the way we live. That in Roman society was different. It was the gods and goddesses and the culture and the political. It was so intertwined that even if I didn't believe in a particular festival to Zeus, you better believe I would show up with my gift. Okay, just expected that I would show up with my gift, or I would be ridiculed by the religious as an atheist, and by the people who don't even believe, right, as somebody that's out of sync with Roman society. Okay, so with Pilate is one of the sophisticates. He's one of the educated ones, and it's very likely that he didn't believe they were real. Okay, so explanations regarding Pilate thinking that Yeshua was some kind of a Zeus that appeared to men, and you'll see this in commentaries, are probably not likely. It's probably not something like fear, the fear that, wow, there's something supernatural going on here, probably was not something that motivated him. And so that's going to be something we're going to encounter, I think, again and again with Pilate. So keep that in mind. And keep in mind, too, we've already said it. We mentioned 4 things that Pilate was already in trouble for, very serious things. And he could not afford a goof up. So on the one hand, his dilemma is, I can't get the people against Rome. Okay? I can't have the people against Rome any more than they are, okay? Because Rome's not going to like that. They expect me to keep order. On the other hand, I can't appease the people to the degree that I give up any kind of my power. So I've got to find some way to lay the blame on the people. Rome's going to be free, and they can argue this amongst themselves, but we won't have any insurrection. Okay, yeah, clear? Okay,
Yeah.
so those things are very important. When we get to the Passover, I'll have another explanation for what was happening there as well. Not a complete. I'm not worried about whether it was a Passover or not. The idea of the preparation of the Passover, what was that? Okay, it's a specific term in the New Covenant, and what does it really mean? All right, so he allows Yeshua to be flogged. So you probably know that flogging was horrible. Leather straps and these little butterfly pieces of metal at the end that just ripped the skin right off you. Most of the times people would die before they ever, got crucified. So this was a serious thing, and Pilate had no idea whether he was going to die from the flogging or not. Okay, so there's no worry about what's going to happen to Yeshua here. Okay, he basically is doing his part. Okay, and maybe not. He instructed his people. I don't want him to die at our hands. I somehow have to get the leaders to take the onus. Okay, so he has them flogged, and then in verse 2, the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe, and they went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. So, what do you think about that? Just
It's
huh?
Cool.
Cruel, but it also mocks the king. This is what we do to the King of the Jews. Okay, slapping someone in the face was a sign of demeaning. It was something demeaning. Okay, it's different than a punch, right? Slapping somebody means what? You're servants. You're nothing. I can do with you with whatever I want. Okay. Hail, King of the Jews. Okay. So here's these ordinary soldiers, no rank, and they're mocking the Jewish king. Okay.
This is what they choose to do. They're just letting them. Pilate gives them to the soldiers, and the soldiers do
Yeah,
for
and
their own amusement or their own satisfaction, their own.
anyone who was crucified, whatever that person had, went to the soldiers anyway. I mean, they made a little profit out of it. Okay, and we're going to see that. So they have this crude joke. Here's the King of the Jews. Once more, Pilate's coming in and out. By the way, if you count them all up, 7 times. He goes in and out 7 times. He's going in, he's going out, going in. Now, is he contemplating truly what should I do with this innocent man? Or is he contemplating how am I going to accomplish the things I need to accomplish?
At least damage to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Self-centered.
Self-centered
Yeah.
all the way. That was his reputation, and that's what we see here. So Pilate came in. Were they down there, by the way? Is there a group down there?
No.
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 So he closed the door.
Mhm.
Okay. So he came out and said to the Judeans, "Look, I'm bringing him out to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." Of course, he just had him flogged.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you almost killed him, but
Yeah.
There's no basis, right? So it's not sincere. It can't. It's just there's no sincerity here whatsoever.
like a beating, then a warning.
Yeah, right. You know,
Yeah.
when Yeshua came out wearing the crown of thorns and purple robe, Pilate said to him, notice what he says, "Here is the man, just an ordinary man, okay, just like any of you. Doesn't mean anything to me." Well, he did mean something because his fear was what? He had the title, the King of the Jews. Okay, but he's not saying, "Behold your king." At this juncture, behold the man, right? He's just a man. You know, what do you have against him? As soon as the chief priests and officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate's getting exactly what he wants. But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him." Now Pilate knew they couldn't. It's another slant. You see it?
Mhm.
He knew that, and by the way, the place where they were meeting is the Hall of Hewn Stones. You remember me talking about that? It is exactly the place where the Sanhedrin used to meet to adjudicate capital crimes. And now it's that place where he's adjudicating, a pagan, in the Hall of Hewn Stones. That power was taken away from them. And this is another slam. You crucify him if you can,
Right.
i.e., you don't have the power. I'm in the Hall of Hewn Stones now. Rome is in that hall. You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis of a charge against him. Meaning, I'm not concerned with your religious law. There is no charge that Rome wants to levy against this man. Okay?
Right.
Rome's off the hook. The Judeans insisted, "We have a law, and according to the law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." Now, everybody knew the Son of God means the Messiah, the King of Israel. Okay? The King of Israel is the Son of God. Right? So, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. So why is he afraid? Because now they're bringing up to the surface and in public a challenge to the emperor, right? And he went back inside. There he goes again. "From where do you come?" he asked Yeshua. But Yeshua gave him no answer. "Are you up for the kingship and you were exiled by the leaders and now you're back to take the throne? Where do you come from? It's not a question about heaven or earth. Where did you come from? That you come back, right? If he would have said Parthia, that would be bad, because the Parthians were rebelling against Rome, okay, and winning.
Wow.
If he said Gaul, if he said any place that was antagonistic to Rome, he would have a charge to levy, right? So he's fearful that there is a charge that's going to get Rome on the hook. All right. So Yeshua gives him no answer, right? Nothing. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you? I've got the legal power completely. Why don't you, give me something? Yeshua answered, you would have no power over me if it was not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed over to me is guilty of a greater sin. Okay? So Pilate's got what he wants. That's the story he's going to give. The people wanted this to happen. They didn't have the power to crucify Yeshua. So they asked me to do it, but I made sure that Rome was not going to be to blame. Rome did not have a charge against him. But the Jewish leaders are not stupid. Okay? So from then on, Pilate tried to set Yeshua free, but the Judeans kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are, here it comes, you are no friend of Caesar.
Yeah.
Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar.
So he's a rebel.
Okay, he's a rebel. All right, he's a Barabbas. Okay, without a sword. And that's what it is. If Pilate exonerates, here's the threat. If you exonerate Yeshua, we're going to inform Rome that you let a potential king go. All right? We're going to tell on you. And he's going to be plotting with alliances to overthrow Rome, or at least to come against Rome. Rome was already in great debt coming to the land of Israel. It was a terribly expensive project, and Romans weren't that happy about being in Israel. They generally were not happy. The treasuries were being depleted, even more so in 70 CE, more so in 135 CE. It was terribly, terribly expensive. So here he is in the Hall of Hewn Stones. How ironic. But now he's got what he needs. And when Pilate heard this, he brought Yeshua out. He sat down on the judge's seat in a place known as the Stone Pavement, which is in Aramaic, Gabata. This is the Hall of Hewn Stones, the pavement of stones. It was the day of the preparation of Passover week. Now, what does this mean? It's in the Torah. It's not mentioned. The preparation of Passover is not mentioned. It's not in the other Gospels. It's the preparation, the Passover.
Isn't Nissan 14
15.
or 15?
Yeah. So it was the preparation of the Passover. So what, in fact, could this mean? The only thing that it could mean is what the rabbinic literature talks about, and that is it wasn't the preparation of the Passover sacrifice, because it's never called that. The preparation of the Passover lamb is never called this, and we never see that term except in one instance. It was the preparation for the great Sabbath that occurred during Passover week, and it was a Friday. So the Friday before the Sabbath during Passover week was deemed the preparation of the Passover. And why the preparation of the Passover? Because at 3:00 in the afternoon, the Chagiga sacrifice, I think I've already mentioned this, which was the most important one of all the days. Every day a Passover sacrifice would be offered at 3:00 in the afternoon. But this one set the tone for the rest of the days. If you didn't partake of this, you couldn't partake. If you were unclean for this one, you would be unclean for the rest of the Passover. So you'd be
So it's a
precluded.
Cleansing period,
Right. Right. Which is different than the normal cleansing, right? So this is specifically the preparation of the Chagiga on the Friday before the Great Sabbath. And it was a great Sabbath because it's Shabbat during Passover week. Right? So that's what it means to prepare the food for the day for that particular day, the Chagiga, and for the day of the Sabbath. And it says it was about the 6th hour. And the people worry about this because Mark and others say it was the 3rd hour. Well, this is the complexity of time in the first century. Edersheim explains this. You can divide the day up into individual hours: 1st hour, 2nd hour, 3rd hour, 4th hour, or you can divide the day up into 4 quadrants, like the 0 to 3 would be the 3rd hour. So anytime in that, it could be the 1st hour, the 2nd, it would be termed the 3rd hour with regard to what? With regard to any time in that quadrant. Okay. If you want to do it differently, you can do it differently. Here, the 3rd quadrant or the 3rd hour is actually 6 hours after 12. I think that's the way it goes. Catch me up to speed if you.
And it says about noon.
Yeah. Well, it can be. It can be anywhere from noon to 3, right? So it depends on which system you are used to. If you're a Galilean, if farther away from Jerusalem you get, the more loosey and goosey it gets. Okay, it's like if it takes you, in Scripture, if it takes you 2.5 days, it took you 3 days. Okay, if you took you 1.5 days to get somewhere, it took you 2 days. Okay, so that's the way they do it. Time is not that exact. So whether it is the 6th hour or the 3rd hour, using quadrants or using the actual hour, is 3 o'clock. Okay, or 12. I'm sorry, 12 o'clock. All right, so that's not really that important, except that the irony here is, instead of preparing, like they had other priests to do it, but instead of getting your mind situated on the Chagiga at 3 o'clock, what are they doing? They've got a man on trial.
Yeah.
With no evidence. It's just it's very poor reasoning.
Well, then also with the 3 pilgrimage festivals, all the priests served during that week.
Yeah.
Right. So there were a lot of them. You got all the
Sure.
priests.
But still, the high priest should be concerned
Yeah.
I know.
with.
But no, it was just your
Yeah.
point that there are other people.
Yeah.
That, there's other things going
Oh,
on,
yeah.
and they have plenty of people to do
Yeah.
those things. So.
It's just to me terribly. What story have you read that's more ironic than this? Wanting to kill a man without evidence,
I know.
right? Without witnesses, credible witnesses, at the time where you should be worrying about your own ritual purity and your own, and you can have all the ritual purity in the world, and look what you're doing, right? Okay, so he's figuring out. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Yeshua. Carrying out his own cross, he went to the place of the skull, which is in Aramaic called Golgotha. I mean, he was already weak, and carrying this cross, which was probably a T-shaped. There's many drawings of these things, X-shaped, T-shaped, the cross shape. I'm not sure which one it was, but it had to be heavy. Here they crucified him, and with 2 others, one on each side of Yeshua, and Yeshua in the middle. And so these guys are in another place called robbers. Okay, they're like Barabbas. And so Yeshua is linked in with according to Isaiah 53, he's linked in with these guys. Okay. He's called a malefactor, just like these robbers. And John's not that concerned with the dialogue between them. He's just saying that Yeshua is in the middle of those that are labeled antithetical to proper society, antithetical to proper religion, antithetical to proper thinking. Okay. Saying that he was divine. Okay. Antithetical to rational thinking. As far as rational thinking goes. Okay. I mean, I can't rationally think about eternity. It's not possible to rationally think about it. You don't have any context. So to rationally think about God becoming flesh, unless you see it clearly built up from the scriptures, it's like, that's weird. He's a king, but he has no kingdom here. His kingdom is in heaven. Like, how does that work? Is he going to bring it down? Going to bring us up? Is it just a thought? Rational thinking is going to lead you everywhere except illumination. The basis for faith, illumination, revelation. Revelation produces faith. Okay. So they crucified him with the two others, one on each side of Yeshua, and Yeshua, in fact, in the middle. Now you can imagine in the heat of the day how excruciating this would be, and I don't need to. There is I think in Jerusalem there is an ossuary that actually contains the remnants. I think the only one that we've ever discovered of a man who was crucified. And the way they did it was at least this man, they nailed his feet from the side. And then they pegged him in such a way as he hung over limp. So it'd be kind of this twisted, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that you can't breathe.
Yeah.
Asphyxiation, right? So it's actually a quicker death and an increased agony. All right. So he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Philippians 2:8. Horrible situation. Pilate had and this sums it up for us. We've talked about it enough, but this kind of sums it up with regard to Pilate's motivations. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened it to the cross. It read, Yeshua of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Judeans read this sign, for the place where Yeshua was crucified was near the city. And the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Now, the lingua franca of the day was Greek. Everybody spoke Greek. But Latin was also known, and Aramaic was the standard language of the Judeans, the Samaritans, Israel, greater Israel. So they saw this sign. The chief priests and the Judeans protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews. But this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. And here's the famous statement. Pilate answered, what I have written, I've written. Like, here's your king. This is what happens to kings. If you ever decide you want to have a king, just look at him and be reminded what's going to happen to that king, right? Which Bar Kokhba, later on in the Bar Kokhba revolution, he was proclaimed the Messiah. And, of course, they killed him, but that it was a warning, right? Now, why would they not want to, down the road, why would they not, and we'll read this, why would they not want to keep his body up all night? Well, first of all, there was a Sabbath was coming. And the idea, the ancient thought was, the longer you keep a body on a tree, hanging in any way from a tree as a source of punishment, a dead body, you eventually you increase the pollution of the land. You're desecrating the actual land. You're bringing a curse upon yourself. So from that perspective, they didn't want the body there long. But from the Sabbath standpoint of view, they certainly didn't want anything desecrated. Right? So they would have gotten him off of there quickly. When the soldiers crucified Yeshua, they took his clothes, dividing them up into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. The garment was seamless, woven in one place from top to bottom. Let us not tear it, they said to one another. Let us decide by lot who will get it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they divided my garments. This is in Psalm 22:18. Divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. So this is what the soldiers did. And so what Yeshua would wear, probably a long tunic, an undergarment. He would wear an outer garment, which would be folded up, and that would form like the pockets. You could put stuff in there, a girdle to tie it together, and then a turban and some sandals. So the 4 guys got 4 things, different things. But when it came to the 5th thing, the robe, what use would it have been to cut it up? So they decided to gamble for it. All right. Okay. So near the cross of Yeshua stood his mother, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clophas, and Mary Magdalene. 4 women are mentioned here. Mary, the wife of Clophas, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Yeshua, and his mother's sister, who probably was Salome. I think we've mentioned this before, the mother of James and John.
75% of them were named Mary.
Mary.
3 out of the 4.
3 out of 4. So it's a lot of Marys.
No confusion there.
Oh, man. All right. So Mary Magdala, of course, you know her story. They made her a prostitute later on in church history. There's no, it's ridiculous.
She had 7 demons in her, right? Am I misquoting it?
Was that Magdala, or was that the?
I don't know. I always thought it was Mary Magdalene that had the 7 demons, but
I think it was.
maybe I'm wrong.
But Magdala is a town. Magdala is a fishing town where they prepared salted fish. Has nothing to do with, some of the rabbis tried to make her name mean the hairdresser, and what hairdressers do on the side, and all kinds of weird things, But Magdala is simply the town. Miriam of Magdala, a fishing town, salted fish. Has nothing to do with other vocations, right? So there they are. You just can imagine his mother seeing this.
The horror of it.
Well, he got to the point where he was unrecognizable. He was marred more than any man, from Isaiah 53. It must have been horrid, and others who were there. So he, later, verses 28, knowing that all was now fulfilled, completed, the goal had been reached, and it's in the perfect tense. So everything that needed to be done was going to be done. Okay. That's why we can say Messiah was crucified from the foundation of the world. It was done and continued to be done until historically everything was completed, right? So later, knowing that all was now completed, and so the scripture would be fulfilled, Yeshua said, I am thirsty. So in Psalm 69, verse 21, I think we've talked enough about prophecy that these individual scriptures are not specific prophecies for this specific event, but the context is similar. This is a larger context than Psalm 69. This is a larger context than Psalm 22. Right? So in application of that biblical talk, you have that as a kind of prophecy. If it happened to King David, even more so his progeny, King Messiah. Right? If he was betrayed, even more so, King Messiah. If Israel went into captivity, even more so, the very Messiah of Israel has to go into captivity. The royal throne has to go into captivity, right? So in that way, are there specific prophecies? There are. There's no question. But they're explicit, and we can understand the chronology of those things.
There was one fulfilled, because when I was thinking about Mary, I went back here and looked. It's in Luke too,
Yep.
where when Jesus was being dedicated in the temple or circumcised, I should say, Yeshua's father and mother were marveling at the things. There was a prophet, Shimon, or Simon,
Yep.
was saying about him. And he blessed them and said to the child's mother, Miriam, the child will cause many in Israel to fall and to rise. He will become a sign whom people will speak against. Moreover, a sword will pierce your own heart too.
Yeah.
That was the
Oh,
part.
yeah.
That's very good that you brought that out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that, and then, of course, Miriam could hardly understand all of that, but now she understands it to the fullest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty tough to see your own child like that.
Mm.
Any other comments on that? Nope. All right. A jar of wine vinegar, the sour wine was probably that wine that the common soldier drank. It was cheap. It was available. So they soaked the sponge in it and put the sponge on a stalk of a hyssop plant, and they lifted it to Yeshua's lips. And so he people argue about how long the pole was. It gets to be ridiculous. Because the Latin version says it's a long pole. These are the things we don't want to get into.
Yeah.
When he had received the drink, Yeshua said, "It is fulfilled. The goal has been reached." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So the Greek is very interesting. The English, we read here, what does your translation say? Gave up his spirit.
Yeah,
Gave
mine
up his
says
spirit.
gave up his
That's what mine
spirit
says,
to.
and he delivered up.
Yeah, he handed it over.
Oh, wow.
He handed over his spirit.
Mm.
I mean, he gave away his life. No one took it away from him.
Yeah, but to hand it over means just what you're saying, willing.
And also, I've heard also that, maybe not in this chapter, but he explained very loudly at the very end some words, and a person being crucified through suffocation would not have had the energy to go out to say something
Oh,
loudly.
yeah.
So that was almost supernatural, and that he gave his life up willingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that idea of just handing it over here.
Mm.
When I think about my life, handing it over to God, that's a different thing than saying I submit to your will.
Mm. Yeah.
Like what choice have I got if I want to live a life that's quality life? But handing it over is
Total
different.
surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can surrender for a lot of motives. But if you hand something over, when General Lee handed his sword to Grant, that was a willing gesture. Okay, that's it. You win. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm done. Right. So I just like the picture. This is the willing son hands over, right, to the father. Huh?
Submissive.
Yeah, submissive, but it's submissive in a way that is not self-serving. Like I have to submit to God's will, otherwise I won't live a good life. That's very self-serving. It's hard to get away from being self-serving because we're so good at it. We've learned it, but not being self-serving. Love doesn't count the wrongs done to it because it is not self-serving, right? It doesn't serve itself, and that's the kind of picture that's very difficult to imagine if we haven't gone through something like that. With salvation, with handing ourselves over to God in salvation, if that was a true giving up, a true willingness out of love, then we have some kind of inkling for it. But if it was just to escape hell, and many of us were afraid of hell. Yeah, I'm yours. Just remember that when I die. And I mean, let's face it, nobody wants to be outside of the God's presence. But as you learn love and the motivation of love, things being done out of love, handing over out of love, giving tithes out of love, giving a Bible study out of love, coming to services out of love, doing a good deed out of love. All these things are exemplified in him. If I want to see what it's like to be a believer, I look at it. Now, it was the day of preparation. Now we see explicitly that what I was saying was correct. And the next day was to be a special Sabbath.
This is where I was getting to. I thought Nissan 15 was a high Sabbath, and that he would have been crucified on Nissan 14.
No, 15.
Okay.
15 was not a high Sabbath. 16 was a high Sabbath.
Is that usually on the calendar?
No, it changes. It's not always. Okay.
Nissan.
See, here's the problem.
15th is a feast day.
Feast day.
Right, but it's not, the high Sabbath is the Shabbat after. This is
Okay.
with the 15th being on a Friday, what we say is a Friday.
All right. But sometimes when you look at the calendar, sometimes Nissan 15 or 16, they don't always fall on a Sabbath.
That's because the Jewish calendar,
Yeah,
the
right.
winners were the Pharisees.
Say again?
The winners of the argument as to what it meant by the Sabbath belongs to the Pharisees. They won because they survived, and the Sadducees didn't. The Sadducees said that it was always the Sabbath during Passover week, right? So that Saturday would always be the same. The Pharisees said no, it's the day. It's the day after Passover. That's meant. So that's when the counting of the Omer starts.
Oh, yeah.
For the Sadducees, counting of the Omer started later on a Saturday. Right? But the Pharisees won that battle because they lived longer as a group. But I think the Sadducees were correct on this one. Clearly.
Yeah.
From this,
And so at this time, the Pharisees were, Caiaphas and they were both Pharisees. So
No.
they were the ones in power, right?
Caiaphas, they were Sadducees.
They weren't Pharisees.
No.
Oh, really?
Mm-mm.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
No, a lot of these,
So they were in power then.
They
So
were in
who
power.
would have been- I can kind of see where things shifted to where the Pharisees eventually won, but when was that winning part of it? Was it here for the reference here?
second century.
Second
It
century.
wasn't until the second century. Once the 135 rebellion was over,
Okay.
the only teachers that really produced communities were Pharisaic. Okay. For example, if you read Talmudic discussions of washings, of the feast days, you read basically schools of thought that were in flux. Okay. Here's an example.
Yeah.
Was it lawful to pull your animal out of a pit on the Sabbath? One group said yes, the other group said no. Okay. The ones that said no were the ones that came to Yeshua and said you transgressed the Sabbath. Right? But it wasn't a done deal. Leaning on the Sabbath, things like that. There were a lot of issues that were in discussion in the first century. They were not settled. Some of them weren't settled really until the Mishnah 212. That's already third century.
So at this point, so at this point in time, the Sadducees are there, and I know there's the schools of thought going back and forth.
But they are
There's a
clearly
higher
in power.
probability
Yeah.
that it would have been defined their way
Yes,
and not the other way.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm still a little confused. I'm sorry. And in Leviticus 23:5, it says, on the 14th day of the first month is the twilight, is the Lord's Passover. I always thought Yeshua was crucified on the 14th of Nisan. That's why.
No, the twilight means that's when
I
it
know the very next one
begins.
to hit twilight, that's the 15th.
The meal's actually partaken of
On the 15th.
on the 15th.
But are the animals?
Killed on the
Killed.
14th.
So that's that's why I thought that Yeshua was crucified on the 14th, because he was the lamb.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
But remember
you're
the
just
path.
saying he wasn't
No.
crucified on the 14th,
No.
even though that's where I was.
No,
I mean, it may be crazy thought the way I'm looking at it.
but the Chagiga, the sacrifice, the 3 o'clock sacrifice, every day of Passover, the first one being the most important, is also called the Passover sacrifice.
Right, the 3 o'clock one is always on the fifth, on the.
On the 15th, 16th, 17th, but the 15th, 3 o'clock sacrifice is
On
the
the
most
15th.
important of
Okay,
it.
on 50. So that's why he was crucified at 3
Remember,
3 p.m. on
yes,
on the
Yeah,
15th.
that
remember
makes sense,
the Passover, as the Bible knows it, is a shorter holiday than what we know. We have the Passover, and then we have Hag HaMatzot. These are two different holidays. We just call it the Passover because Passover is the longer, period of time. Passover is the thing that initiates everything.
Right.
But the first important sacrifice of Passover week, aside from the Pesach, is on Hag HaMatzot.
So the high Sabbath is on the 16th of Nisan. Is that
Yes.
okay? I've been a day off for a long time.
It's okay. It's okay. It's all
You
right.
know, for several thousand years, it's not too bad.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, just averages. All right.
I know.
Let's see.
Yeah, it really does.
People who
I
had
can't
really
find the
been,
time, huh?
I did it wrong. It was like, no, you didn't do it wrong.
Well, we go by the Pharisaic calendar these days, which is unfortunate. Because the resurrection, if we went by the Sadducean calendar, the resurrection would always be on a Sunday
Oh, wow.
during Passover week.
Hmm.
Right?
And the Sadducees were the ones that we would probably refer to as the fundamentalists, that there was a more literal translation.
Yes.
And the Pharisees seemed to be a little more, they tried to translate it more into the time.
Their antagonists, the Sadducees and the Essenes, used to call the Pharisees the maker of smooth things.
Mm.
Okay. They can take a rough stone, and before your very
Yeah.
eyes, it becomes smooth. Right?
You're a smooth talker.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
really.
All right, so it is. So let's see here. Yeah, now it was the day of the preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath, because the Judeans did not want the bodies to be left up on the crosses during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down, and the soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man. Now, when you break the legs, the body moves forward, so now you can breathe nothing.
Yeah, because you can't even push
No.
up.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's impossible. It's over in very, very short order. So they broke the legs of the first man who'd been crucified with Yeshua, and then those of the other man. But when they came to Yeshua, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. And so he has a swift death compared to the others. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Yeshua's side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony. And here's John in the third person again.
Oh, yeah.
And his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones would be broken. Now, what is the context of Psalm 34:20? The context is one, that the protection of a righteous man is guaranteed by God. So, in such a way, it says poetically that none of his bones will be broken. Likewise, the Passover lamb in Exodus, the legs weren't to be broken. Okay. So, do those specific scriptures specifically speak about this? Well, in God's mind, they do, but the writer could never anticipate this. So, in terms of type, it's fulfilled in greater capacity in a righteous man, in the Passover lamb, in the Chagiga sacrifice, in the ultimate sacrifice, Yeshua, right? Okay. Not one of his bones, and another scripture says they will look on the one they have pierced. Okay, so that's Isaiah 53. And again, nobody could anticipate that it would be a Roman soldier that would pierce his side. Okay. And if you want to take a look at a gory but graphic and accurate depiction of crucifixion, John Hopkins put out years ago a fairly lengthy paper describing crucifixion in detail and the crosses that were used and things like that. So it's pretty graphic. It's, If you get squeamish easily, don't read it. Later, verse 38, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Yeshua. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Yeshua, but secretly because he feared the Judeans. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. Well, Pilate's permission. So Joseph, we're going to find, is clearly a rich man. Okay. With Pilate's permission, probably was accompanied with some money. Right.
Mm.
It's always that way.
Right.
All right. So it's implied. All right. So Joseph of Arimathea comes. Matthew says he was wealthy. Mark says he was a member of the Sanhedrin, but he was waiting for the kingdom of God. So not all of the people in the Sanhedrin were of one mind. Okay. Joseph, this was pretty. He did not concur with the Sanhedrin's desire to condemn Yeshua. So very courageous here. So he petitioned Pilate, probably paid him off, and he was accompanied by Nicodemus. Okay, we know about Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Yeshua at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Now,
That's a lot.
Nicodemus,
That's
Oh, wow.
what's that?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then,
Yeah.
So
75
Nicodemus is
Joseph of
pounds.
Arimathea
Yeah.
was a Sadducee. Is that what you said?
probably Joseph was a wealthy elder.
Okay.
Okay, because the Sanhedrin wasn't just religious scholars.
Okay.
It was the priests.
Mhm.
There were some Essenes on it. There were Jewish nationalists. There were Pharisees,
So it
and there were
makes
also
sense.
elders.
Oh.
Elders tended to be the wealthy class, right? So Nicodemus, how come we don't? I mean, if he was on the Sanhedrin, he must have been in charge of enacting laws. Okay, so we would expect to read about him in rabbinic literature, except rabbinic literature has a very interesting way of blotting your name out if it's
Yeah,
unhappy
believe
with
in
you.
Yeshua.
There's one Rabbi Meir who lived in the, I think it's the 2nd century, and he came against the head guy, Rabbi Judah, in a very vicious way. He tried to take over the Sanhedrin, and he failed. And so they removed his name from a lot of laws that he was responsible for, and they called them Baraitas, additions. So when you read that in the Talmudic literature, well, here's a Baraita. We don't, you don't know who said it. You don't know what. Well, it's Rabbi Meir. Okay, they just don't want to give him credit. Or Gamaliel. Gamaliel became a believer later in life. So Gamaliel is like Rabban, big shot. There must have been a lot of laws that he was responsible for, but they removed his name from them. Okay, so it was a, many cultures did this, but the Jewish culture also did it.
Stalin
Oh.
took his name out.
Okay.
He took people out and he took their name
Egypt.
out.
I mean, you had Egyptians.
Jesus told Nicodemus in chapter 3, he calls him, "Aren't you the teacher of Israel?
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
these things." And so we're kind of left with Nicodemus was confused. He was really trying to understand it,
Yeah.
but either at that point
What's
or
that?
as time
Ended
went
up.
on, here he is. He doesn't seem to be confused
No.
any
Yeah,
longer.
that's
No.
right.
He
I don't
gets
say
it.
he's got it figured out, but he's got this part.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he's
And
learned
notice
about.
the article in Greek is there. The teacher.
Yeah, the teacher.
The teacher. Man, big shot. Okay, go ahead.
Teachers, yeah.
So okay, he was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Yeshua at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. That's a lot of money. I can tell you that. Taking Yeshua's body, the two of them wrapped it and with spices and strips of linen, and this was in accordance with the Jewish burial customs. You wrap the body in good smelling things to take away the stench of the decay. Okay. Plus, it's a respectful way, right, to take care of the body. All right. The clothes, the linen, these are garments. They're equivalent to garments. At the place where Yeshua was crucified, 41, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And people object to, I hate to tell you this, I like the garden tomb. I think it's a beautiful spot, but I think it's very unlikely that was the spot. I think actually the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a more likely spot. The objection is that the walls of Jerusalem are outside of that spot, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is within the walls. Well, those walls were built later. That spot is actually outside of the first century walls of Jerusalem, and the place of the skull, all of that is quite near. And I hate to say it, I think it's probably it. I think it probably.
Yeah, because I have to think the likelihood of, there were already a lot of dead people that were buried. So to find a place that no one had ever been laid probably wasn't in the most populated central part
Right.
of a cemetery,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because it kind of emanates outward.
Joseph of Arimathea owned it. It was a private,
Yeah. That's
Plot.
what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
right? We have found near that area private plots for the high priests, right?
Wow.
So this was an exclusive area. It was his tomb. And then he puts Yeshua in his tomb, right? So because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Yeshua there. I think we're going to stop there. We're real close.
But Yeshua gives it back.
You vacate.
Yeah.
He's only there for a short period of time.
That was very kind.
Yeah.
All right. So anyhow, we're going to go into the resurrection, which is really powerful. That's why I sent. Maybe I didn't send it to you. An email. I'll try to get that to you. It's a paper by a fellow who summarized a book by one Pinchas Lapid, who great scholar. Excuse me, no longer with us. And he wrote a book, The Resurrection of Jesus, A Jewish Perspective. And he's absolutely convinced that the resurrection was real. Otherwise, he can't explain why the disciples went from unbelief to belief. And just like that, it had to be the resurrection. So he's all in. He's not a believer, doesn't think Yeshua's the Messiah, but I just thought it was an interesting summary.
So he believes in the resurrection.
If he
Yeah.
doesn't believe he's the Messiah, who in the world would he believe he is the
That's-
Well,
resurrection?
he was a falsely accused rabbi.
Yeah, but he wouldn't be raised from the dead.
Well, he has his own explanation. I just say what is interesting to me is that he thinks that in that place, the New Covenant is a credible original source of Jewish history.
Wow.
And that's pretty
That's
staggering.
good.
So we're going to go into chapter 20, verses 1 and following, and let's take a look at that, study it a little bit, and think about what the women said when they came to the tomb. To me, it's very interesting. What did they say? Why did they say it? What was the response? What was the revelation? Remember, revelation produces faith. You can't conjure that up.
Yeah.
You need a revelation, which means you have to spend some time with the thing that you want revelation about, right? You don't just say, well, I just decided to believe it. It's not very deep. Anyway, thank you for joining us, and we will see you Saturday morning at 9:30 for our Torah study, 10:30 for our services, and then we've got lunch together, and we've got some afternoon classes as well. Be glad to see you. Our mailing address is 131 Forsyth Street, Norfolk, Virginia 23505. And you can check us out on the web, Facebook, and YouTube. And we look forward to seeing you. God bless you and shalom.
Vivian sent a text, said you left out 26 and 27, chapter 26 and 27.
Verses 26 and 27?
Yeah,